Good morning, and welcome to today's webcast, Embedded Information with Construction Processes. Before I begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thank you for viewing our webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters, Casey Fike, Senior Manager, and Stephen Bacchetti, Partner. Casey is a Senior Manager in our Enterprise Systems Consulting practice and holds DOMO Professional and Technical certifications and is a Certified Data Management Professional. Stephen has practiced public accounting since 2014, where he focuses primarily on construction and performance audits for construction projects and capital improvement programs. With that, I'll turn it over to Casey to get us started.
Thanks, Chad. Really appreciate it. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time today. A couple areas we'd like to cover. The first is challenges in utilizing information within your organization. Then we'll get into a couple of specific use cases for the construction industry and then tie it all back together on how we can realize value from your information in your organization. But before we jump into the first section, just a quick poll here. Want to get an understand of how you are currently utilizing information within your business. So automated reports, whether those might be dashboards or just Excel outputs are sent to you periodically or on a defined schedule, requests to IT or a data team to run reports as needed. We might be using a data warehouse. I'm logging into source systems and manually pulling that data out. Or last, I have no idea where to start. So okay, probably about 15 more seconds and then we'll click through. Great. Again, I know time's short, so we'll move it along. But just interesting results here. We have some automated capabilities in-house. Looks like the majority are logging into source systems, pulling that data, CSV outputs, Excel outputs, whatever that may be, or maybe a few people there in third place there has no idea where to start. So hopefully we bring up some ideas and get some thought process going on how we can help. So first off, high-performing organizations are data-driven. But what do we mean when we say data-driven, right? I think the first for us, our approach is using data as kind of the piece that ties all this graphic together, whereas we're using information in your business processes and inserting that in a timely manner, right? I think what we saw in those poll results is, hey, I'm manually logging in. There's a chance that data becomes stale, right? What we want to do or what we work with our clients on is making that data more timely. And again, inserting that into the business process where we can see the results and then take action based on those results. Again, kind of how we kind of think through this is there's a lot you can do as it relates to information within your business and your organization, but starting small, taking an incremental approach, focus on high value, high return business processes. Where providing information into those frontline workers, if you will, can really turn around and increase business value. So previous slide, we talked about embedding information in your business process. I think first and foremost, the term data analytics, there is so much marketing material out there. It's a very broadly used topic. It's very confusing, right? I think for us and the approach we take is we want to solve business problems, provide insight using your organization's information, right? And that can come from a variety of different ways. But again, embedding information within the business process. Again, title of the slide, but want to call that out, right? I think that is kind of the key takeaway here. We'll apply it to some construction use cases later, but that's our approach to utilizing information within your business. Business process, that could be really anything within your business. It might be your procurement cycle. It might be part of your project management cycle. Board reporting, management reporting, those are maybe not defined business processes, but those are still tasks, objectives that you're executing within your business. And I think the last piece here is we want to make sure the information we're using is timely, right? I don't want to be using stale data that's a month old, a quarter old, a year old. I need to know how my business is performing right now, or maybe a day in the past, so I can take action within that decision window. And Steve, I know we have this example that you and I have been working on and talking about, but any chance you can kind of share this example with the group?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Casey. So I think what we're trying to portray here is ways you can leverage current processes, current data to maximize KPIs and make better business decisions. So one of the examples we're trying to point out here, for example, many of you, if you're building construction, you guys have change orders. You may be inputting change orders for review upon receipt. We've seen organizations, for example, that those change orders are not being reviewed and processed timely. If any of you know construction generally, or in certain circumstances, change orders can need to be processed and reviewed timely to prevent schedule delays on construction. So what we're saying here is like those processes are built in within your systems, and you can leverage kind of those data from the processes to incorporate into KPI saying, hey, we have change orders that haven't been reviewed or processed for an X amount of time. Is there a process there? So instead of just waiting for the change orders to be approved and hoping for the best, that data is currently sitting in your system, and you can maximize the use of that data for this specific example, saying, hey, these changes are not being reviewed timely. Is there an issue with the job? Is there an issue with the review process? How do we ensure that our change order review process is efficient, timely, ensuring compliance with the contract terms, to making sure that your project is being executed optimally? So we got a couple more examples later on, but we just wanted to highlight instances where this data does exist in your system, and are you maximizing usage for it? So
that's perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that. Right. Again, timely, getting that data I need to know now, or maybe as soon as possible, right? And then focusing on a business process. Where can we make incremental progress, improve those processes, and then realize value to the organization? So I think here, reasons for lack of information in your business and your business processes, right? I think the first thing is we're not sure where to begin. Again, as I mentioned earlier, very broad, but taking a very focused, a very incremental approach on just starting with a simple, high value business process. How can we improve that? Understanding where do we have data and information available? How can we then insert that back into the business process, right? Again, start small, be very focused. We tried to start, or maybe we have, and now we're in analysis paralysis, right? So for example, we're separate project working with a client, they have over 900 dashboards, right? I think shows great initiative, but I think the question we're asking as we're going through this kind of dashboard realization process is, what sort of questions are we trying to answer with all these dashboards we created? What does the usage look like, right? It can get data, again, very broad. There's a lot of different ways we can go, but just, again, staying focused. Too expensive to make the massive investments in technology, right? I think it's again, I get back to just starting small, understanding business processes. There's a lot of tools, there's a lot of software out there that we're familiar with that we use. That it's a small incremental investment, right? That you can then grow over time once you realize the value there. Don't have the needed technology staff. Again, this is kind of something that we run into, a lot of IT departments. For the clients that we work with, they're very small, right? But then again, that's something that really getting the business involved, understanding the process, understanding the questions, making those questions pointed as we ask to our IT and data teams. That's where we kind of focus our efforts. We've attempted to look at our data, but nothing reconciles. I'll get into governance later in this, but I think it's understanding, more detail there on where are we pulling that data from? How is that data being manipulated? Or do we have different groups within our organization thinking they're using the same data sets, but when in fact they aren't? Like maybe we have a filter applied to a data set or a dashboard. And then the last piece, we've struggled to build a culture of using data for our business. And this is where I think, we see a lot of data projects start out very wide. We want to get all of our data in. Again, it's starting with a business process, focusing on it with a team, getting some incremental, small wins, and then sharing that information and the successes out within the organization. That's how you can really develop the culture and really try to really start to shift to being a data-driven organization, right? Again, the last piece there, this is something, again, just talking about our approach, here are the challenges we see with our clients. These are things that we can definitely help with. Kind of tying in with the last slide, but this is kind of what we see with a typical data project. Right. I think that first bullet, I've really hammered on it, but I do think it's really crucial is we're not sure kind of where to start, what business, what do we need to focus on, right? I think it's working with our clients to understand their business processes and then understanding where can we implement or insert information and drive some quick wins and return value, right? The next piece is we engage IT, or we work with IT, get all of our data in a data warehouse, right? I think that becomes really difficult to manage. And again, it gets away from what data do we need to understand that business process and insert data into it. Third bullet, we've invested a ton of time and resources and cost in developing a data warehouse and pipelines and data visualization tools. Again, start small. Let's take an incremental approach. Let's understand what we can do. The design, development, and test cycle time to spin this up. Again, I think of a lot of the projects we've run into that have struggled, kind of are aligned to these bullets where we've bitten off more than we can chew. And I think the last piece there is reconciling data doesn't always tie out, right? I think, again, the governance piece will be on the next slide, but it's a process and starting small, being very focused, getting quick wins, and then building the culture. So data governance and just kind of the need for governance over data. I know it sounds very bureaucratic. There's a lot of frameworks out there that we work with, but I think there's a ton of value in not just unleashing data into a data warehouse, right? I think it's important to understand who owns data. Do we have what we call like a data champion, somebody that sits within the business that can work with other business users, that is somewhat familiar with data, maybe not as keys on the keyboard, can be developing code, but can at least have those conversations on where the data is coming from, how it should be used, how to apply filters to dashboards. Right, I think that's all very key within that governance structure. I think the big piece that I want to pull out here is you want your discussions or you want your insights to be about the data itself and not evolve or disevolve into discussions on whose data is right, whose data is correct. Because that's something else that we've seen is we have two separate groups that think they're using the same set of data, presenting that data, but again, they maybe have filtered something incorrectly, or they don't have a complete and accurate data set, right? I think governance really kind of puts a framework around ensuring your data is used in a correct and accurate manner. So with that said, Steve, I'll pass. Apologies, clicked the wrong button. Steve, I'll pass it to you for the construction use cases.
Great. All right. So when we do our projects, which involve a lot of different capital program projects, we need to identify the relevant data for external and internal stakeholder information needs. So as Casey pointed out, you don't need 900 dashboards and you present all those to all parties. You really got to focus in on who are the appropriate levels, what is the information that's driving decisions, are you at least incorporating the minimum best practice KPIs, which we'll cover later, and how can you leverage current data available to maximize the decision-making process. Next, to piggyback off everything Casey has said, you got to plan, design systems to collect, store, and analyze the data. So really understanding what's the best source data, making sure that you're linking to that data, and then you're reporting those results and tracking performance. When selecting a system or means to monitor or manage a project, take steps to ensure they'll provide the capability to report on projects and programs with minimal effort. If any of you have done construction, which I think many of you are or planning to, if you're running reports at the end of the month and it takes a couple days or weeks to analyze the data, the issue that you could have prevented could have been mitigated earlier on. So you really want that real-time data being processed, analyzed with the appropriate parties as soon as possible so you can detect early on risk, put in action plans, because that month window could kind of be the impact of a no change order to a bigger change order that causing budget overruns, et cetera. And again, once you have the data governance strategy, the linking to automate the data to the appropriate stakeholders, regularly reporting on the project statuses within their appropriate areas to the appropriate personnel would be considered a best practice. And then here are just some of the considerations or different reporting things that you can leverage data that exists. So again, all this data exists. It's whether project owners are incorporating this data within their KPIs. So if you're doing a guarantee max price contract, there could be audit rights where you could have access to project data, including labor reports, construction activity schedules, depending whether it's your team or an outside party, payments, budgets, and forecasts. So really understanding what are the drivers and key data sources to optimize your decision-making process. And I'll just give a couple of examples of situations we've seen in the past that would have been easily detected or not occurred if you kind of had these considerations built into your reporting program. So we did have one client where they their KPIs for their capital program were pretty minimal. They were reporting budget and expenditures, and they were always under budget. However, what they failed to do within their KPIs, which we were able to identify very early on, which was excellent, is we made recommendations saying, hey, you need your budgets. They need to be reviewed for accuracy and appropriateness in a regular basis. You need to be working with your project managers on forecast data to making sure that your forecasts aren't exceeding budgets, commitments, expenditures, et cetera. When we got in pretty early on, we requested all the forecast documentation for the projects, and they were actually very over budget at a very early stage of the project. That data lived. It was in their commitment reporting, whether it was their approved change orders or pending change orders. They could have easily detected it without the kind of intense audit process of going project by project for this program that had many, many projects within it. So in this case, they were luckily able to de-scope some projects that weren't for their immediate need, and they were able to add additional funding. But it's just one of those instances that if they had the real-time data reporting available, they could have detected it at a very, very early stage. The next example, which I kind of touched on earlier is the review process timeline of change orders. So if you have a major capital program, there's a lot of projects, a lot of changes that are likely occurring, especially within this environment. A recent example is change orders were taking way too long to process, which was resulting in supply chain issues because they weren't procuring the materials at the appropriate time. They were stuck within the review process, and these issues weren't being escalated to the appropriate parties. So many times organizations have change orders, processing time data available, but they're not leveraging it for the appropriate dashboards at the appropriate parties. So this would be an easy place to say, hey, when a change order gets inputted, what's the input date? When's the approval process date? Are there exceptions within that duration? And that small little dashboard KPI could prevent a lot of potential issues. Sorry. And my final example is schedule. So we have a lot of organizations that use Procore or other construction management software systems. There may be instances, I think Casey noted this, is there's different data sources going to different parties. So it's important to understand what's the most accurate data source and making sure that that information is being reported to the appropriate stakeholders. But for this one instance, they had construction schedules that were being prepared not by the construction team on timelines for delivery of a project. The delivery of the project, and this was a school. So the delivery of the project was the basis for certain kids going to school at that facility. If you talk to construction, they were well aware that the project had been delayed and it was going to impact that timeline. But that data wasn't being reported to the appropriate stakeholders. They had all the information. Procore or their construction management tool that they were leveraging had all the information. It just wasn't being relayed to the right parties at the right time, which created a big operational issue. They were able to mitigate it based off kind of the procedures that we performed on saying, hey, your schedules aren't correct per your reporting, but it didn't need the audit process. They could have linked to the right data sources. They could ensure the timely review and updates of schedule data or budget and forecast data within those system of records. And that information could have triggered kind of that early on detection of the schedule delays so that they could have planned accordingly. So all these situations, the data was there. It just wasn't being leveraged by the appropriate parties in the real-time basis to kind of have that early detection to prevent kind of the issues that they had later on. Luckily, all these were detected early on enough where they were able to mitigate a lot of the damages. But we have seen other organizations that they haven't had the controls or the audit processes performed until later on, so the damage was done. Okay, next, policies and data governance framework. So once you have all the data and you have the KPIs lined up of what are the key decision-making kind of data points, you got to understand how the stakeholders will collaborate. You got to have a kind of a role of what each party's role within that process is. What are they evaluating? So if you're having dashboards that have 900 different dashboards, it's impossible for everyone to say, yeah, we have total coverage over that. So you really got to be strategic on the data that's being presented to the appropriate parties. If there are decision-making processes built in within that, you got to be strategic on those roles and responsibilities and what the provisions for monitoring and oversight of the program are. And then I think, Casey, you had some, before we kind of list off all the KPIs, which do you want to kind of highlight on some of these?
Well, yeah, I just think like generally, right? I think KPIs and it's probably live on a dashboard, right? And I know I talked about focus on a business process earlier, but I think this, like if I'm an executive at a construction organization and I can come in at the beginning of the day, take a look at a dashboard and understand where I need to prioritize my focus during the day, right? And drive change, drive us to our organization, our company to a better spot. And to me, that's a business process, right? Not necessarily like budgeting, forecasting, project management as we would kind of consider our typical, construction business processes, but it's right that management reporting and even dashboarding to an extent. Again, how do I take action within the business based on the information presented to me? That's kind of my thought around, KPIs, right? Not necessarily, I know we talked about the 900 dashboards, but it's understanding what's the right fit of those KPIs and those dashboards for your organization, right? And everybody's different. So, but please, Steve, continue.
Perfect. So here I'll go through it quickly just because we have not a lot of time, but these are some of the KPIs that we recommend from like a financial operational standpoint. But I want you to think about your systems. What other information are you collecting that you can kind of enhance the reporting around these areas? So percent completed of your project, budget expended, project milestones and schedule, contract status information, including retention, revenue and expenditure activity. If you're having like outsourced funding, that you earn interest with kind of the run rate of expenditures occurring, cash flow, funding commitments, available appropriations, comparison of results in relation to performance measures, forecasts and budget or timelines, specifically any changes to the scope of the project. So having real-time reporting around change orders or pending change orders could be a significant change of the project that needs further investigation as soon as possible. Any aids to kind of understand the data in terms of like the annual snapshots of schedule, cost estimates, and the confirmation of continued availability of the appropriateness of the revenue sources identified in the capital project. There are just way too many organizations that they don't know they are running out of funds until the very end. So having this real-time data plugged into the appropriate data sources is important to making sure that your program is successful and/or project. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Casey.
Great, Steve. Hey, great insight. Really appreciate that. So again, I know we're running a bit short on time, but just to kind of tie it all back together, how do we realize value from our information, right? This kind of ties back to that high-performing organization slide we talked about earlier, right? But I think it's, how we realize value and drive value with the information within our organizations is, make that data more accessible, right? Again, I think, as we saw earlier, a lot of people are logging into specific systems and pulling that information. How do we kind of build a more holistic view of our data and our information and make people aware of that's available to them, right? Because I think it's part of this is an education process around here's what you have available to you within our organization on how you can answer business questions. Again, Steve brought this up. He really hammered this piece is that last bullet there, show results in near real time, right? I think it's, if we're thinking about construction projects and we're running up to, we're almost out of funds, I need to know that today. I don't need to know that at the end of the month or 2 months from now. It needs to be brought to my attention as soon as possible. So. And on this slide here, I think just, again, the last kind of couple piece or kind of these highlights here is, be collaborative, right? I think it's, when I think about collaboration, I view it as a lot of these projects succeed with heavy business involvement, right? Because as the end users, your business processes and the questions you need to ask, right? These initiatives can't be just technology focused. There needs to be a good partnership. And then be in control, right? Again, we talked about governance and having a good handle on the data. What does this data mean? What does it represent? Those are two key things off this slide that, we really try to focus on. So kind of in conclusion, I've said this quite a bit, but start small, be focused, keep it simple. It's focus on business questions, tie information to that, realize the value, right? And that's when when we kind of start small, we can then expand and share successes with the rest of the organization. And that helps drive the culture, right? Those two first bullets right there. The third bullet, just because you have all your information inside of a data warehouse doesn't necessarily mean you're going to drive insight from it, right? Again, it gets back to answering the business questions, inserting information in a timely manner into the business process. The governance piece, I've talked about this, but again, there's different scales of governance, but there needs to be some level of governance to ensure that we're using data in a consistent manner. It's complete, it's accurate. Our end users, or our business users, excuse me, are educated on that. And then the last one, large scale technology environments, you don't need to go out and do a huge investment in data warehouse visualization tools. Again, start small, build. Those aren't required to get something, to get your data initiatives off the ground. With that said, Chad, I'll pass it back to you, but thank you, everybody. And Steve, thank you for co-presenting. I really appreciate it. Really great insight, but back to you, Chad.
Thank you, Casey and Stephen, for a great presentation today. If you submitted questions today, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. Here's a link to our online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete the survey, as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us again next time.
Thanks, everyone.